Have you ever visited a new city only to find yourself eventually staring at this structure? This long, thick structure just standing up straight and proud? I'm sure you have. And if not, I'm sure you've seen the biggest and tallest of them all in a movie or a show. The Washington Monument, which stands at 555 feet tall. These structures are called obelisks. At first glance, they seem just like another building built by a country just for the sake of it. But these structures, these obelisks, are ancient. Some might even argue magical, dating all the way back to ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, they served as conduits for the sun. Today, many of these ancient Egyptian obelisks stand in several European cities, with more of them standing in Europe than Egypt itself, which is really crazy when you take the time to think about it. So, why are these structures so important? What purpose do they serve? Why does Europe have more than Egypt? And why do countries even go out of their way to build modern ones? First, let's talk about the name. The Egyptians never actually called them obelisk. The word obelisk comes from the Greek word obeliskos, meaning skewer. Probably because if you stand really far away and you look at one of them, they do look like skewers. But the Egyptians themselves actually called it teknu. Teknu has been roughly translated to pierce the sky. If you're a board game enthusiast, you probably also know of Teknu, a game based on 6 Egyptian gods, which is kind of strange because Teknu, or obelisks as we now call them, were mostly erected for one Egyptian god, the god Ra. The thing about obelisks is that they were almost always raised in pairs and were positioned at the entrance of temples. From what we know, the shape of them were meant to echo the Benben, which in ancient Egyptian creation myth was a mound that rose from chaos at the very beginning of creation, the first solid object to exist. At the top of each obelisk was a pyramidion, which was made from electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. The choice of electrum wasn't random. It was meant to be shiny, so it would reflect the first and last rays of the sun every single day. And as the day went by, the position of the sun on this electrum, as well as the shadow of the obelisk itself, doubled as an extremely accurate and effective giant sundial. So now, not only do you have massive, heavy, tall monuments to a god, you have what functions as a giant clock. And not only that, but there are hundreds of them built. This was a powerful statement of power and opulence by the pharaohs of Egypt who commissioned them to be built. It became a symbol of empire. So when the Romans finally conquered Egypt in 32 BC during the Battle of Actium, guess what they decided to start doing? They started collecting these obelisks and shipped them back to Rome. The Roman emperors wanted them for the same reason the pharaohs built them, to symbolize empire. If you go to Vatican City, you will immediately take note of the Vatican obelisk in St. Peter's Square, which was shipped to Rome in 40 AD by the Roman Emperor Caligula. Some centuries after this, European powers started doing something similar. Take for instance Cleopatra's Needle standing tall and proud in London's Victoria Embankment. Fun fact, this needle is not named after Cleopatra. It was carved around 1450 BC for Thutmose III, about 1,400 years before Cleopatra was even born. This obelisk was gifted to Britain in 1819 by the ruler of Egypt and Sudan at the time, Muhammad Ali, for Britain's victories against France in the Battle of the Nile and the Battle of Alexandria. It took until 1878, 59 years after this gift, that it was eventually shipped and raised in Britain. As mentioned earlier, these obelisks always come in pairs, and you can find its twin in New York City's Central Park, raised there in 1881 as a gift to America for staying neutral while Britain and France fought for influence over Egypt. This same Muhammad Ali ended up gifting another obelisk, what is now in Place de la Concorde in Paris, to France in 1829 as a thank you for the French scholar Jean-François Champollion for cracking Egyptian hieroglyphics using the Rosetta Stone. This obelisk stood at the entrance of the Luxor Temple during the reign of Ramses II. Its twin is still there today. As you've noticed by now, there's definitely an appetite for ancient Egyptian obelisks. But not only that, there's also an appetite for modern obelisks. Which brings us back to the Washington Monument. The Washington Monument isn't the only modern obelisk built. If you walk into any city, the chances are you will spot a modern obelisk very quickly. But they always tend to be smaller in size and shorter than ancient Egyptian obelisks, and they almost always pale in comparison to the Washington Monument. The idea for creating this monument, the Washington Monument, goes back to 1783, shortly after America's independence from Britain. The monument was meant to honor America's founding father, George Washington. But plans to build it didn't fully materialize until 1833, when a group called Washington National Monument Society started putting everything together to make it happen. They eventually settled on this design by Robert Mills, an architect. The monument, based on his design, would be a 600-foot obelisk surrounded by 30 massive columns, each topped with a statue. It would be the grandest memorial on Earth. It didn't go smoothly. One thing happened after another, like an anti-Catholic group called the Know Nothings, stealing a slab of marble that was donated to the project by Pope Pius IX, and they threw it into the Potomac River. And eventually, the Civil War in 1864, which led to the unfinished obelisk being abandoned for nearly 3 decades, with it even functioning as a cattle yard at one point. It was eventually completed, but only standing at 555 feet and with some heavy modifications compared to the original design. The final capstone, a 3,300-pound block of marble, was set in place in December 1884, and the monument was opened to the public in 1888. It was the tallest human-made structure on Earth, a title it held until the Eiffel Tower was completed in 1889. But to this day, it stands as the tallest obelisk in the world, a feat that would surely make the pharaohs of Egypt both proud and envious. The Egyptians built obelisks to represent permanence, stability, and a connection between earthly rule and divine eternal power to their god Ra. Strip away the sun god Ra and any other religious attachment, and you are left with exactly the qualities that every nation wants attached to its own founders and its own capital: permanence, stability, and the sense that this nation too is built to last forever. And this is why these obelisks, these beautiful structures, are everywhere today.